Welcome, Kelly. Thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond Barriers podcast. We are thrilled to have you here. And let's just dive right in. Tell us a little bit about your journey, how you landed in the role that you're in, and what are some key lessons you learned along the way?
Sure. First, thank you, Monica, for having me as a guest. I love your mission to help women with professional development, and I'm super flattered to be here. So thank you. My career has been focused on the business of sports, media, and entertainment. It's been a great journey. I'll take you through the highlights. I spent my first 10 years at the Walt Disney Company, starting at ABC Sports in production, and then moving over to ESPN on the business side in programming and acquisitions, where we negotiated the rights to televise NFL, NBA, NHL, many other sports.
Mm-hmm.
From there, I went to Six Flags. I followed my boss at the time, Mark Shapiro, and ran the East Coast parks from Montreal to DC. And these parks were really like small cities. I was focused on,
Yes.
yes, general management, which actually meant everything from ticket pricing to staffing to capital projects like new roller coasters. And anyhow, it was a fun ride. And after Six Flags, I took a more entrepreneurial route and worked for two different female-owned small companies. I really wanted to make an effort to build my career around my life at that time and not vice versa.
Right.
And one of my assignments at that time with Sellers Easton Media was to work with A-Rod Corp. And Alex was in the process of trying to buy the Mets and scale the firm. And he saw a need for my skills and background. And I saw some really exciting things going on there. And that led to my current position as Chief Business Officer at A-Rod Corp. So I like to think of my journey in terms of the Steve Jobs 2005 graduation speech, where he talks about how each stop in our career is like a dot. And it's not until you look over your shoulder that you can see how all the dots connect. He says to follow your heart, even if it takes you off the well-worn path, and you'll see ultimately how all these dots connect in unexpected ways later in life. And that really was profound for me, because I can see so clearly now how each of my experiences have led to where I am today. And it really provided a lot of clarity around it.
That's fantastic. And I love that analogy because it is a little bit about following your heart. But my question for you is that, making these kind of transitions that you did can be difficult and scary. And following your heart is sometimes it tells what to do, what have to do, but your head sometimes plays with you in terms of, the self-doubt. Can I do it? How did you ever have any limiting beliefs going from, you went to a lot of really, if we think about it, male dominated, industries and areas, especially in sports. And, were there ever any limiting beliefs, self-doubt that you had? And if so, how did you get past it?
So it's funny. There's limiting beliefs and there's fears, and some people sort of bundle those together. And I try to separate them, because one I think is actually super positive and the other one can be very limiting.
Right.
When it comes to fear, it's a funny thing for me because I have a different sense of what I'm afraid of. I grew up around funeral homes. That's our family business. And so the obituaries were read like sports pages. And at the dinner table, we always heard how somebody lived their life. And you figure out pretty fast what to be afraid of. I was told, no motorcycles, no drugs, no rock climbing.
Right.
But I learned perspective on what mattered most. And somehow my family always found humor, and it's a coping mechanism. But I always had a sense of like what the big picture included, and not to sweat the small stuff and try to avoid some of those limiting beliefs. But we all have them. I mean, it's just a fact. I don't care who you are. And what's helped me is to try to obviously limit those voices and shift the mindset to more positive self-talk. I think that's like a lifelong journey. My cousin Christine has had a very successful career. And I remember when I first started out, she said to me, look, you need to remember, when you think you're like a B minus C plus, you're actually an A minus. Like, we are never as bad as we think. And that's helped me a lot. Like, if I'm having a bad day or whatever, I can say like, I don't know that I'm coming across as as bad as I think I am. That's been helpful to me.
That's fantastic. And it's so true. I appreciate what you say, is that, we are our worst critic. And a lot of the times we give ourselves a grade much lower than, what others are seeing. I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about clarity, because you've had a lot of very different roles, and I can appreciate how you were following your heart. how did you get that clarity of, when these opportunities were coming your way, even though they may have not seemed like they were connecting in the right way and you followed your heart? What was that clarity, or what was that mindset you had in saying yes to the opportunity, where more often than not, a lot of women will opt out or, not take those types of opportunities because they don't see the connection?
Yeah. So, Monica, companies spend so much time on creating mission, vision, values. There's offsites to discuss, and it's
Right.
just a big focus, and all the decisions flow downstream from there. We're doing that right now with the Minnesota Timberwolves, and it's fascinating. You set the core foundation, and then the values govern the behavior, and everything flows. I think it's super important for people to do that in their own career. And that
Mm.
becomes your compass. That provides the clarity that you need, that puts different opportunities into light in terms of what is the proper action based on your own personal North Star and mission, vision, values. So for me, my mission has always just to be an impact player wherever I go, try to make it better than I found it, whether it's my job, my family, my friends, my community, and if there's a need, fill it. And that's been super fulfilling for me. I also know from my values, authenticity is important to me, humor, having fun at what I do, and
Right.
diversity. And so I try to find opportunities that include those features.
That's so insightful. And I love what you said in terms of, yes, lots of companies and everybody always talk about mission, vision, and goals and all of these things. And we should be doing the same thing, which makes me think a little bit about personal branding. And in the same way, like you said, with the Timberwolves and others, thinking about the brand and what do you stand for. And I think a lot of the times people forget that about their own personal brand and telling their story. Can you share a little bit about that? Of like, when someone maybe asks you, what is your brand? And how do you articulate your strengths or your story? How do you go about really kind of articulating that in a unique value proposition way?
Throughout my career, I've really tried to let my work speak for itself. We,
Mm-hmm.
we have a saying at A-Rod Corp, it's don't talk about it, be about it. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's that athlete mentality. I played sports growing up, but it's about performance, it's about stats, it's about letting your production show on the field,
Mm-hmm.
and surrounding myself with managers and good people who recognize that. And I've had good luck with that. I also think running to tough assignments has worked for me. When I left ESPN to go to Six Flags, people thought I was nuts. ESPN was sort of at the top,
Right.
and Six Flags was a turnaround. It had $2 billion of debt. There were headwinds. It was a proxy fight, and I sort of loved the opportunity to get P&L experience, public company, go with a team that I loved and believed in, and I don't regret it for a minute. And the last thing I'll say is I'm learning now as I go in my career how important it is to share your story, and that it's hard for women to do that, at least for me.
Yes.
And I have had to get comfortable with the fact that I'm not tooting my own horn. It's actually beneficial to other people if I can share it. And so I'm working on that.
Yes, I think we all are. And I think that's the hardest thing that we, as I've shared with you before, we work with a lot of women in a lot of organizations and companies, and they come through this accelerator program. And one of the hardest things for them to do is to articulate their unique value proposition and share it. And, and there is a subtle art, right? There's a fine line between self-promoting and tooting your own horn and then or blowing it to where it's just like, okay, it's obnoxious. So if you could, tell me a little bit about in what are some unique ways maybe where you're saying I'm sharing my story, but it feels better that I'm not like bragging, in other words. So what are some opportunities that women can do that in terms of being able to take credit for work that they're doing, but not necessarily be all about me? Do you have any examples that you've in the past have learned how to tell your story more subtly?
I think through your relationships, it has to be authentic. I don't know that it's effective to sort of go out on a dedicated campaign to try
Right.
to spread your word. I think it really does come down to how you show up in the world, how you show up with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that will make itself known. I think it is a mistake to focus too much on, I don't know. It's a fine line, to be honest,
Yes.
Monica, because there's at a certain point when I think women do have to advocate for themselves, and then at a certain point they have to just put their head down and do the work.
Right.
And want, if they want to be treated like everybody else, they have to step up and do the work. And so I think it's a fine line. I don't know that there's a perfect answer on that, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends also on where you are in your career. You know,
Mm-hmm.
if you're starting out, it's much more about trying to outwork everybody and get the job done and deliver and execute and show what you're made of and show your
Mm-hmm.
potential. And then as you get older, you have more of a story to tell. But I think we have to pace ourselves.
I love that. I love the idea of it's true. You have to build the story, right? And you have to, you know, perform and you've got to, you know, be able to then have the experiences that you can talk about. So it is a little bit of starting the story and then being able to tell the story. I think that is really important. One of the other things that we see a lot, and we see in the research as well, is that women sometimes get stereotyped, or maybe, you know, they lean towards indecision and have a difficult time making difficult decisions or even taking risks. And, you know, just based on your career journey, you've taken quite a few risks, like you said, leaving ESPN and going to Six Flags. And, you know, how did you weigh the risk reward in making those leaps of faith and going into some of these other, you know, opportunities?
Well, I think when it comes to difficult decisions, that you really have to check across your head, your heart, and your gut. And Diana Chapman has a great book called Conscious Leadership about this. And she calls it EQ, IQ, and BQ. And
Hmm.
really listening across all three and seeing how the spirit guides you. And especially at that point in your life, because your needs might be different depending on where you are in your life.
Right.
I also love, and I do it with my kids all the time, is just the old fashioned pro and con list. Like,
Hmm.
write it down, like, weigh out the risk, the reward, and see what fits based on what your goals are at that time.
Yeah, I love the pros and cons, and it's one of the most simple strategies, but it does help you look at, you know, positive, negative. You know, here's the upside, here's the downside. Can I live with the downside? And if so, okay, let me move forward. That's fantastic. Now, you've been really successful, and like you said, your work really has shown you, you know, your ethic, work ethic, and all the results that you've had. So much so, like you said, when you were working with A-Rod on on some projects, and he saw your skill set and saw, you know, those success strategies, and you ended up going over and working with the A-Rod Corporation. What are some of those? Can you share some of those maybe habits or rituals that you do that help you be successful? Like, what would you say is your secret sauce?
I'm really into goal setting.
Mm-hmm.
That is important to me, both on sort of a macro and micro level. I think
Mm-hmm.
on a micro level, every year I map out my 4 goals with the tactics. At A-Rod Corp, we call it the game plan. I work with an executive coach named Matt Spielman, who's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And that really charts the course. On a macro level, I don't really sit down and map it out like Google Maps. I'm going to go left and then go right. It's
Right.
more about, like, I'm in the ocean navigating the stars, and it feels more, it's more feel than prescriptive, I would say,
Uh-huh.
not locked in. On an individual basis, day to day, I write down 3 things each day to win the day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's super helpful at the end. I can just cross check and say, like, how did I do? It's just my own way to hold myself accountable.
And do you have a secret on, I think one of the things that even sometimes I struggle with is prioritizing and actually executing and focusing on the right thing at the right time. How do you go about maybe daily or weekly on what is the, you know, how do you prioritize and make sure, even when you're trying to, you know, balance work and life and integrate the two, how do you manage that?
Well, the biggest thing that I do that helps me is every Sunday night I send to Alex and the team my priorities for the week
Mm,
based on all the areas that I'm working, and that really does help keep me honest by Friday. How have I done versus that list? And it also reminds me, no, actually, these are the priorities, because 10 things will pop up between that Sunday and
Right.
Friday. And it reminds me, like, no, actually, these are really the priorities. So, and then we have that accountability amongst our team, because now everybody is sharing them. And so we know what everybody's up to. And so that's super helpful. And I think another habit and ritual that sort of helps me stay clear is communication with other people, like just continuing to connect with other people and keeping your ear to the ground on sort of what are the most relevant trends, what's driving business or driving sports or media, whatever I'm
Mhm.
focused on at that moment, and not losing sight of that. I think it's so easy to get into the inbox and just try to plow through and get through each day. But
Mhm.
I think in order to really know what's important, we've got to lift our head up and sort of look around and keep our finger on the pulse.
Right. I think that's so insightful. And I love that every Sunday, it's almost kind of a ritual. Every Sunday, these are my priorities. You share them. And that's a little bit of the whole managing expectations with others of like, here are the things that I need to work on. And I feel like, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it gives you a little bit of power to say no when those 10 other things come at you and you're like, listen, I sent you my priority for the week. And unless you're telling me this takes priority over that, I'm going to say no or I'm going to shift things around. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the power of community because you have developed really strong relationships with influential people and have had phenomenal opportunities come your way. And one of the things I've learned over the course of working with a lot of women and sometimes even lived experience where we don't leverage our community in the right way. We may leverage them from a professional perspective and have really great relationships, but not leveraging them professionally to help us get things done. And can you help share like how you gained access to influential relationships and how you manage those and how do you leverage them in the right way?
Building relationships might be my superpower. I've learned that from my mother. She has so many multi-generational relationships from all aspects of her life, and it truly is one of the most fulfilling parts of life. And she's really modeled to me how to build them, how to maintain them, and how to cherish them.
Mm.
And you dust them off if you need to. I mean, I recently had lunch with a former colleague from ESPN that I hadn't spoken to in 17 years. And it was like we picked up where we left off. A number of great things came from that. And relationships don't expire, but it definitely takes work to maintain them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a critical thing for people to do it and to do it authentically.
Mm-hmm.
And in business, having been involved in a number of negotiations, I think it's really about creating those win-win situations. So people leave with a good taste in their mouth. I mean, Alex
Right.
always asks in our business conversations, like, how can I help? He leads with that. Like, how can I help? Let's be a missionary, not a mercenary. And people remember that. I mean, it's a long game. So you want to make sure that it's a win-win scenario.
I love that, the whole describing it as a win-win, because that's exactly what it is. And I think, I think more women need to really think about that reciprocity of not being on the end where you're constantly giving. And because I think that's what happens with a lot of women is they're constantly giving to the relationship, but never, creating that win-win situation where they're asking and asking for help and getting you leveraging a resource as well. And so I love the whole win-win of thinking of it that way with that mindset. And then how can I be of service? And then also in some cases when you need that, like you said, nurturing that relationship so you can ask for help when you need it.
Yeah, I would add, I think it's really important that to give a reason for them to invite you to the table. Like, be useful, be relevant. Why should they care? Like, ask yourself, what is it about what they're doing at that moment where I can be helpful?
Mm-hmm.
And also just to see people as people. Like, at the end of the day, everyone, I don't care where you are in the chain, like, everyone has influence to some degree, and we all have something to add and learn from each other. And not to lose sight of that. It's not just about trying to land that one person in that one chair, but
Mhm.
open yourself to what you can learn from everybody, and then think like, who can they meet in my network that might be helpful to their mission. And
Mhm.
when you bring people together in sort of unexpected ways, that's when the creative sparks come, and you just don't know what's going to happen. So I get a lot of joy out of that, and I think that's so much part of doing business.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, I know that, you're in the kind of sports industry and you're probably surrounded by a lot of men, more so than other women. And you may have junior women constantly, reaching out to you for mentoring and things. What do you think, what is some words of advice that you would give to the young women that maybe you see them struggling? What are you typically having to coach young women to do so that they can get ahead?
Well, like you mentioned, I have worked in male dominated fields, but I've always worked with people who have empowered me. And I think it's women should make sure that they put themselves in an environment where they feel like they have opportunity, they feel like they have respect. And I think I've been fortunate in that way, because over the past 15 years, I feel like I have this band of brothers that I could call at any time and pick up the phone, and vice versa, and be there for each other. And that's been my own experience, but I know everyone is different. I think that it's really making sure that you're identifying leaders who will empower you and support you and put you in an environment where you feel that.
I think that's brilliant, your band of brothers. And I think it's so important that you said that you've had individuals in your career who have empowered you. But from what I'm getting is that most of these sponsors or this band of brothers have been male. And I think women sometimes make the mistake that they feel they have to find another female to kind of coach them or lead them, when in reality, it could be a man who has the role you want, that's kind of taking you under their wing and showing you the way. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, have most of your mentor sponsors been men, and how have you leveraged that?
They have, and it just has happened organically. I'm grateful for that. I have a lot of gratitude. And again, it goes back to, I showed up to do the job, and
Mm.
it was recognized and supported, and I was advanced because of it. And I always felt that and knew that, even if the optics might have been different. And so it's hard to say. Like I can't put a finger on. I think it's been that way because I've been in industries that are male dominated. So if I was in other industries, it might be different. It doesn't mean one is better than the other. I
Mhm.
think it's important to have both, to be honest. And I have had both. And I have family members. Like I have my brother is an incredible mentor. As I mentioned, my cousin Christine. Like I have people even outside of industry
Mhm.
that have led me and guided me. And so I'm fortunate that way. But I think people refer to this like board of directors, and I
Mhm.
do think that that's important, to have a collection of people that know you well, that
Mhm.
can give you that gut check and make sure that you're on the path that you want to be on, that you're in the environment you want to be in, doing the work that you love to do that makes you happy. There are two different tools that I've done that I think can be helpful for people when they're evaluating things like this.
Mhm.
Um, One is the Johnson O'Connor aptitude
Mhm.
study, where you go in and you really learn your aptitudes and what your core talents are, and then you're putting yourself in an environment that
Mhm.
speaks to that. And if you're doing what you're good at, then you're happier, and you're typically with the people that also like to do that,
Yes.
and it becomes a healthy sort of self-reinforcing environment. There's also character tests. There's one called the VIA Institute survey that measures your character strengths, and that's more about what you need to feel to be fulfilled at work. For me, it's honesty, humor, perspective, leadership, and teamwork.
Mhm.
And ultimately, I look for opportunities that those those features.
Mhm.
And if I'm checking off on those things, then ultimately I'm going to be around people that also reflect that. And I think positive relationships that are reinforcing and help you grow in your career come from it just naturally.
That's fantastic. I love those two things, and we'll be sure to pull those out and create those links in your podcast show notes, because I do think it's really important for people to lead with their strengths and make sure that they're doing things that they feel, that they're good at. But I think the other important thing you said is, how do you want to feel when you're working, and making sure that the things that you're doing are eliciting those emotions and those feelings so that you don't get, burnt out per se. Just given, the current environment where people are feeling very burnt out. On that note, what do you do? Because I know you have a very intense jobs, and you're working in, these organizations, and you have very senior roles. What do you do for self-care? How do you kind of dial it down and re-energize?
Well, I exercise every day.
Mm.
Um, I try to meditate. I know the benefits. It's scientifically proven. Whenever I do it, I feel better. I'm more focused. I don't do it enough, is the truth. Um, and I try to find that balance with my family, which means the world to me, and my friends and my community, and live a full life. But I think I've reconciled it with the fact that it's peaks and valleys, and it doesn't matter which one is at the peak, but everything is peaks and valleys. And so you try to take advantage of each scenario. Balance, I think, is a little bit of a misnomer. I mean,
Yes.
if you're doing a job that requires the amount that senior level jobs do, and frankly, most jobs do today, especially sort of during and post COVID, like people are doing more and for longer hours. And I think we all have to have ways to sort of regenerate and know what they are, and know ourselves well enough when we got to unplug and rebuild, because I want to be in it for the long haul.
Right.
And in order to do that, there have to be sort of self-sustaining tactics. It's different for everyone, but that's what's worked for me.
That's fantastic. I love how you describe the peaks and valleys. And I love how you bursted the bubble of there's no balance. There is no work-life balance. And it's kind of work-life integration, and there's ebbs and flows. And yes, you could possibly have it all, but not at the same time. So I
Yeah.
love the peaks and valleys. I think that's a really great visualization. Well, Kelly, this has been phenomenal, and I loved, being able to peek inside your head and hear how you've been successful and your amazing journey. And I know that our listeners are certainly going to resonate with your story. Tell us a little bit about, because we always get this, we have listeners always reach out wanting to know how they can connect. What's the best way they can follow you? Do you have a LinkedIn, Instagram? Where do you kind of leave your Kellyisms for people to follow?
LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I was an early adopter on LinkedIn, and going back to just relationships and staying in touch with people, or on top of what people are doing. It's a great outlet.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. It has been awesome getting to know you, and we hope to continue our connection with Beyond Barriers.
Thanks, Monica. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Awesome.